My thoughts on travel internationally vary from maybe most people, or perhaps I haven't run into a lot of people who share my perspective about traveling internationally. For one thing, I wish I traveled more than I do, and I enjoy travel because I love to be an explorer. I love to engage my mind, my senses, my everything that you see, that you taste, that you feel, it's in the exotic, in the novelty. It's a reprieve, it's a respite, it's any kind of wonderful thing. I'm not a foodie. I love trying new things. I love being in new places. There's also a real sense of potentially abandon that can overcome you when you're away from the daily grind and you have an opportunity to rest, particularly if you are not well connected to social media, and you take this opportunity to just disconnect and be free of everything and everyone and all the responsibilities. I think that for the most part, any kind of opportunity to disengage from the mundane, the normality, the everyday, the routine is an important way of strengthening one's mental health. Rest is important. Why would international travel be significant in this way? For one thing, if it's true that distance allows you to disengage more fully, then the further away you're able to go from your regular life, your everyday, your work, your routine, your obligations, so to speak, the more fully you can experience that rest, the more deeper, that's not good grammar, the more deeply you can experience the rest. International travel also has the bonus, an advantage of being able to really excite that part of the brain that is about seeking novelty, new experiences, change, opportunities to be saturated with new sights, new sounds, new flavors, new environments, new vistas. All of those are priming the pump for rest, for creativity, for innovation, and meeting that need in our brain that we all have of perspective taking. We can't get that if we're always what does this mean? If we're always or often or only allowing ourselves to see the short view, the immediacy of our experience, and not having an opportunity to look at ourselves, our lives, and the lives of other people with a broader lens. Yeah, I think that's something that we definitely have an opportunity much more readily in international travel, just by the mere fact that you're outside of and away from your ordinary life and the culture and the expectations that go with that. Most of the time, people who've had a couple of different types of experiences either have experiences that didn't go well, or have heard of other people who've had experiences that didn't go well, or they've never had therapy and so are using either their imagination or what's mostly available in media, movies, television, as which we want to say are caricatures, although some of them may be more true to life than we'd like to say. And that doesn't give people a really positive experience or enough information to create a positive experience or expectation about therapy. So the skepticism might run something like, I don't need it, we don't talk about our stuff in my culture, or I have a friend of mine who says she had a really bad encounter. My boss used to go to therapy and it used to make him cranky. I remember seeing a movie about such and such, and the therapist was really terrible, really mean, or useless. And so essentially, if you boil it down, people haven't had an opportunity to believe or buy into the notion that therapy could be of use to them. So the skepticism is founded in an inability to relate, an inability to see that the practice of therapy, the practice of counseling, could be meaningful to them, could be supportive to what they're going through. Hope that's as best of an answer that I can give. Many things, or I should say, as with many things, it's historical. Historical in the sense that it's taken quite some time for the perspective to take hold that therapy is of value. And as the culture has changed and adapted to being more individual and less collective, it's become more evident that the circle of women in the culture, the aunts and the great aunts and mothers and sisters, the sisterhood of those women are less accessible in many places, unfortunately, from separations of all kinds. And those sisterhoods have not been replaced. So young people, old people, and everything in between, young and old, children included, are needing to have support from places outside of the family circle, outside of the tribal council, outside of the collective. And that means seeking help from a professional space, professional sphere. Simultaneously, that the culture is shifting and we are finding a need to go outside and beyond our circle. We're not keeping up in terms of educational opportunities and graduation rates and the rate of licensure for therapists of color. If our opportunities have been limited to enter into graduate programs, it goes to say that it's going to be limited to have therapists of color coming out of those graduate programs. A lot of conventional programs up to maybe 10 years ago were programs where you came right out of undergraduate, went into graduate, and we know that we have many places that have many scholars who have written I understand that there seems to be one type of Christianity. I'll take that back. There seems to be one type of Christian-based ethos that is about suffering, and that suffering has a cleansing or redemptive purpose in one's life. And perhaps consequent to that is the idea that suffering then has to be not only tolerated, but embraced, perhaps even pursued. I want to say, if that is true, then that might be potentially one pathway towards asceticism. Asceticism being a practice of divesting oneself of all the desires and all the concerns of the corporeal life, the life in the flesh, life in the body, our current life. The whole purpose of an ascetic practice is to give a person a focus, or encourage a person to focus on a life that is beyond the corporal, beyond the body, to a life that is in the spirit, in a realm that one might say is more pure, more pristine, godly, holy, I want to say, etc. Because I don't want to make this about asceticism as a practice. And then there are other practices that are still in the Judeo-Christian tradition that are about working hard to understand one's purpose in life, this life, in an effort to be of service, to be mindful of one another, to be able to provide and care for the most vulnerable, and this with the aim of being pleasing to God. Okay. I'm trying to think if there's another way to describe an alternative to both asceticism and this other way that I'm talking about. If it comes to me, I'll add it in. A lot of people who aren't theological scholars may miss the fact that the word therapy itself, therapia, therapua, therapeutic, comes from a definition of taking care of the sick, of being in fact of service. And I can't think of a figure in our ancient or contemporary history that has exemplified care for the sick and being of service more than Jesus Christ, or Jesus of Nazareth, the Christ. So for those people who may have objections to therapy as being antithetical to Christianity, may miss this point, may be missing this idea that therapy in and of itself is definitively Christ-like work, being of service, being of healing, being able to take care of the sick. I may or may not have told you this, that I graduated from the Episcopal Seminary of the Southwest, and so coming from a seminary-based psychological training, of course my education includes a perspective that takes into account the theological Christian ethos as well as spirituality in general, and how the intersection of psychological healing and spiritual healing shows up in our development, shows up in our encounters with difficulty, shows up in how we respond, shows up in how we take in and metabolize trauma, shows up in how we believe and abide by the core values that we represent, because it's those core values and the intersection and contention with those values that often create the suffering. It's that place where they rub against our experiences. It's that moment of fist in the sky, of Why me? Why is it so painful? Those existential types of concerns are exactly what is showing up at the crossroad of life in the flesh and life in the spirit. If an evangelical would claim that Christ would not approve, then I would say they would do well to reread the New Testament and all the ways and places where Christ has spoken directly to the spiritual, psychological, and emotional healing in order to effect what looks to be a physical breakthrough in that moment. Right? I even love those quotations where he says, "Those who have eyes to see and those who have ears to hear." He's not necessarily talking about our physical senses. He's talking about exactly the spirit realm, the place in us that is aware and attuned to what is truth. I also want to say that as a resource for believers, as a resource for anyone who falls in line with the Judeo-Christian ethos, there is more than one way to pray. Prayer can be an appeal directly to God. Prayer can be an introspection towards what has God placed in one's heart. Prayer can be an exploration of what He has placed in divine word. And the call to seek good counsel can be an adjunct to that in every possible permutation you can imagine. That's why we have Bible studies. That's why we consult with our religious leaders and our spiritual leaders. That's why we talk about spiritual formation and spiritual development. That's why we talk about spiritual awareness, existential awareness. Being woke, so we say, is more than waking up from sleep. It is also waking up to an awareness of the depth as well as the breadth of who we are and who we've been created to be. No matter what practice, no matter what belief system that you use, there is always room for awareness, and healing comes with awareness. And I think that that's been held to be quite true, quite evident in the teaching, all the way from the Sermon on the Mount and beyond.